The tremor strikes like a predator's whisper, deep and primal. But it is the protective growl, erupting from Atlas, that truly freezes explorer Kalen Voss in place on the rust-colored plains of Xylos 7. The German shepherd's hackles rise in perfect synchronization with the vibration that seems to pulse upward through the soles of Kalen's boots, through his bones, settling somewhere deep in his chest, where it resonates like an ancient warning bell that has finally found its purpose after millennia of silence. But beware, dear listener, for what follows is not for the faint of heart. And this tremor, this is merely the first breath of something that has been holding its breath for longer than human civilization has existed. The ground beneath them shivers again, stronger this time, and Atlas takes a step backward for the first time in their 18 months of mapping the forgotten worlds of the Andromeda Reach. Kalen's throat constricts as he watches his fearless companion retreat from something that shouldn't exist on this barren, supposedly lifeless world. The dog's dark eyes are fixed on a point roughly 30 meters ahead, where the landscape dips into what appears to be nothing more than another weather-carved depression in the planet's ancient surface. Atlas has faced down the crystalline predators of Kepler 442b without flinching, walked unfazed through the howling storms of gas giant moons where wind could strip flesh from bone. But now something on this dead world has awakened a fear so primal it predates human evolution itself. The energy scanner clipped to Kalen's belt erupts into an erratic symphony of beeps and chirps, its display flickering wildly before settling into readings that make absolutely no sense. The energy signature is massive, concentrated, impossibly ancient, and it's coming from directly beneath the depression that has captured Atlas's terrified attention. "Easy, boy," Kalen whispers, his voice barely carrying in the thin atmosphere. But his hand trembles as he reaches down to rest it on Atlas's head, feeling the tension that courses through the dog's powerful frame like electricity through a conductor. "What is it you sense down there?" The scanner's piercing tone makes both of them jump as energy levels spike beyond anything in its calibrated range, the numbers climbing steadily, as if something deep underground is slowly, deliberately awakening after eons of slumber. Kalen fumbles with the device, nearly dropping it as another tremor rolls beneath their feet, and this time he hears it clearly. Breathing. Deep, measured, impossibly vast, as if the planet itself has suddenly remembered how to draw breath after millennia of holding it in anticipation of this very moment. The exhalation whispers across the plains, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and something else, something that reminds Kalen of the deep archives beneath the Colonial Museum on New Geneva, where ancient artifacts waited in climate-controlled silence for scholars who might never come to understand their secrets. This tremor is not seismic activity as Kalen had initially assumed during his months surveying the outer rim worlds. This is something far more significant, something that makes his breath catch in his throat and his hand instinctively reach for the plasma cutter at his hip. The vibration carries with it an edge of recognition that makes the hair on his arms stand on end, as if his very DNA is responding to stimuli it hasn't encountered since the dawn of consciousness itself. Atlas's growl deepens, reverberating through the thin atmosphere like a tuning fork struck against the fundamental frequency of fear itself. This isn't the territorial warning bark Kalen has heard 1,000 times before during their explorations of hostile worlds. This sound speaks to genetic memories buried so deep they predate human civilization, carrying within it the echo of encounters between species separated by evolutionary gulfs so vast they should never have met. The geological surveys have been thorough, exhaustive in their documentation of Xylos 7's barren landscape. The world had been declared lifeless by 3 separate survey teams, its core long since cooled, its surface scoured clean by eons of cosmic radiation and stellar wind. There should be nothing here capable of generating this kind of energy output, nothing that could make a battle-hardened exploration dog retreat in primal terror. Unless the surveys had missed something. Unless whatever lay beneath the surface had been dormant, waiting, biding its time through geological ages for the right moment, the right visitor, the right combination of circumstances to finally stir from its ancient slumber. Kalen's mind races back to the briefing materials he had studied during the long journey from the colonial hub, scrolling through data files that now seem woefully inadequate in the face of what he's experiencing. Xylos, 7 had been discovered during the second wave exploration missions over a century ago, noted for some unusual mineral formations and traces of what might have once been structures, but nothing that suggested active life or advanced technology. The world had been classified as Category 5, barren, no strategic value, cleared for private mining claims, but unlikely to attract significant interest from the major colonial corporations. But what if the classifications were wrong? What if the ancient structures the early surveys had dismissed as natural formations were actually something far more significant? What if this entire world was not the lifeless rock it appeared to be, but rather a carefully constructed facade hiding secrets that could reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos? The scanner in his hands lets out another sharp, piercing tone that cuts through the thin air like a blade, and Kalen realizes with growing unease that the energy readings are not just increasing, they're following a pattern, a rhythm, like a heartbeat that has been slowing for millennia and is now gradually accelerating towards some predetermined cadence. This cannot be possible, he whispers, more to himself than to Atlas. But even as he speaks the words, he knows they're inadequate. The impossible has already announced itself through the tremor beneath their feet, through the breathing sound that grows stronger with each passing moment, through the terror in his companion's eyes that speaks to truths older than human language. Atlas whines softly, pressing against Kalen's leg with a force that nearly unbalances him. The dog's ears are flat against his head, his tail tucked low, every line of his body language screaming danger in a vocabulary that transcends species boundaries. But beneath the fear, Kalen catches something else in his companion's behavior, something that makes his skin crawl with implications he's not yet ready to confront. Recognition, as if some ancestral memory buried deep in the dog's genetic code, is stirring to life, awakened by stimuli that shouldn't exist on a world that has never known life as humans understand it. The recognition is incomplete, fragmentary, like trying to remember a dream upon waking, but it's there nonetheless, carried in DNA that stretches back through evolutionary history to encounters so ancient they've become myth. Kalen approaches the edge of the depression with steps that feel simultaneously inevitable and impossible, drawn forward by the same curiosity that had driven him to leave the safety of the inner worlds and venture into the vast unknown of space. His boots crunch softly against the iron-rich soil, each footfall echoing with significance that seems to reverberate through dimensions he cannot perceive. What he sees when he peers over the rim makes his breath catch in his throat, and his scientific mind reel with implications that threaten to overwhelm his capacity for rational thought. The depression is not natural at all. What he had taken for erosion patterns and wind-carved rock are actually the remains of structures, impossibly ancient, their original forms barely recognizable after millennia of exposure to cosmic forces that have ground mountains to dust. But there, carved into the slope of what had once been a vast spiral pathway leading down into the Earth's heart, he can make out symbols that are unmistakably artificial, unmistakably intelligent in their design. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they exist in more dimensions than human vision is equipped to process. Mathematical relationships that seem to fold in on themselves, creating optical illusions that make his eyes water and his head ache with the effort of comprehension. These are not the crude scratchings of primitive beings learning to manipulate their environment, but the sophisticated communications of a civilization that had mastered forces humanity has barely begun to understand. And at the center of it all, partially buried beneath millennia of accumulated sediment, but still clearly visible, yawns an opening that defies every law of architecture and engineering Kalen has ever studied. A doorway carved from what appears to be a single piece of black stone, its surface so smooth it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in reality that his eyes struggle to focus upon. The energy readings are strongest there, pulsing like a heartbeat in the electronic symphony of a scanner. And as he watches, faint patterns of light occasionally pulse within the stone's depths like bioluminescent signals in the deepest ocean trenches. The doorway is not simply an entrance, he realizes with growing awe and terror. It's a gateway, a threshold between the world he knows and something else entirely. Atlas whines again, more urgently this time, and Kalen feels the weight of decision settling upon his shoulders like a physical burden. Every instinct screams at him to retreat, to return his ship and file a report that will bring teams of specialists and xenoarchaeologists to investigate this discovery properly. But something deeper than instinct, something that resonates with the same frequency as the breathing sound that grows stronger with each passing moment, tells him that such caution would be not just wrong, but catastrophic. Whatever lies beneath Xylos, Seven has been waiting for centuries, perhaps millennia, for someone to find it. Not just anyone, but someone specific, someone who would understand the significance of what they had discovered and act accordingly. The tremor, the energy readings, the way the very air seems to thicken with anticipation. All of it points to a moment of convergence that has been building toward this encounter across geological ages. I know, boy, Kalen murmurs, scratching behind Atlas's ears with fingers that tremble despite his efforts to project calm. I feel it too. Something down there is calling to us, isn't it? The dog's response is a sound unlike any Kalen has heard from him before, part whine, part growl, part something else entirely that seems to harmonize with the breathing sound that rises from the depths. It's a sound of recognition, of genetic memory stirring to life, of DNA responding to stimuli it hasn't encountered since the earliest days of mammalian evolution, when the world was young and filled with wonders that have since retreated into legend and myth. Kalen checks his equipment one final time, running through the mental checklist that has kept him alive through 18 months of exploring hostile worlds. Oxygen reserves good for another 8 hours. Emergency beacon active and transmitting his location to the orbital relay. Plasma cutter fully charged. Emergency medical supplies, food concentrates, water purification tablets. Everything a prudent explorer needs to survive in hostile environments. But as he inventories his equipment, part of his mind acknowledges the futility of such preparations. Whatever waits in the depths below, whatever ancient intelligence has been sending tremors through the planet's crust and breathing sounds through the thin atmosphere, it exists on a scale that makes human technology seem like children's toys. His plasma cutter might as well be a sharpened stick, his emergency beacon a smoke signal, his life support system's a lungful of air in the face of an ocean. And yet, he begins his descent into the depression anyway, because some discoveries are worth any risk, and some moments of convergence cannot be postponed or delegated to others. Each step echoes with significance that seems to resonate through the ancient stonework beneath his feet, as if the very ground is recording his passage for some cosmic archive that spans worlds and eons. Atlas follows reluctantly, his claws clicking against the weathered stone, his head turning constantly to check for threats that exist only in genetic memory, but feel as real and immediate as the thin air they breathe. The dog's fear is palpable, radiating from him in waves that Kalen can almost see, but beneath the terror lies something else. Duty. Loyalty, the same bonds that have held humans and dogs together since the dawn of civilization, strong enough to overcome even the deepest evolutionary fears. The symbols carved into the pathway grow more intricate as they descend, evolving from simple geometric patterns into complex configurations that seem to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Kalen finds himself having to focus on his feet, on the immediate path ahead, rather than trying to decipher the alien mathematics that decorates every surface. The patterns pull at his consciousness like gravity wells, threatening to trap his attention in recursive loops that could leave him standing motionless for hours while his mind struggles to process information it was never designed to comprehend. The scanner at his belt has given up trying to provide meaningful readings, simply emitting a constant, low hum that seems to harmonize with the breathing sound that grows stronger with every step. The electromagnetic chaos radiating from whatever lies below has overwhelmed its sensors, reducing the sophisticated instrument to little more than a tuning fork vibrating in sympathy with forces beyond its ability to measure or classify. As they descend deeper into the spiral pathway, the thin atmosphere of Xylos, Seven begins to change in ways that should be impossible. The air grows thicker, richer, carrying scents that have no business existing on a world that has been sterile for eons. Ozone and metal, yes, but also something organic, something that speaks of life and growth and the complex chemistry of living systems. Kalen's suit sensors register the changes with alarm, warning him of atmospheric contamination and unknown biological agents. But the readings make no sense in the context of everything he knows about planetary formation and atmospheric evolution. The doorway looms larger as they approach, revealing details that had been invisible from the rim above. What Kalen had taken for simple black stone is actually something far more complex, a material that seems to exist in a state of constant flux, shifting between solid and liquid, and something else entirely that has no name in human science. The surface ripples occasionally, as if responding to their presence, and within its depths, patterns of light pulse like neural activity in a vast, alien brain. The breathing sound is definitely coming from beyond the threshold now, regular and rhythmic, carrying with it harmonics that suggest not just biological processes, but consciousness, intelligence, awareness of their approach. Each inhalation seems to draw in not just air, but something more fundamental, some essence of reality itself, while each exhalation releases energies that make the ancient symbols glow brighter and the very air shimmer with potential. Atlas stops walking when they are still 10 meters from the threshold, his entire body radiating absolute refusal to go any further. The dog stance is one Kalen has never seen before, legs braced, head low, every muscle coiled for either fight or flight, despite the obvious impossibility of either option against whatever waits beyond the impossible doorway. Kalen kneels beside his companion, reading the complex emotions that play across the dog's expressive features. Fear, yes, but also something else. Wonder, recognition, as if Atlas is seeing not just a doorway carved from alien stone, but a glimpse of something from the very earliest dreams of a species, when dogs were wolves and wolves ran beneath stars that had not yet learned the names humans would give them. It's all right, Kalen says softly, though he's not entirely sure he believes it himself. The words feel inadequate in the face of what they're confronting, like trying to calm a hurricane with a whisper. You can wait here if you need to. I understand. But as he stands and takes another step toward the doorway, Atlas lets out a sharp bark that cuts through the thickening air like a gunshot. Not a warning this time, but a protest, a declaration that transcends the boundaries between species and speaks to bonds forged in the crucible of shared experience and mutual dependence. The dog bounds forward, positioning himself between Kalen and the entrance. His meaning is clear as spoken words. If you're going in there, you're not going alone. Stubborn mutt, Kalen says with a smile that doesn't quite hide his gratitude or his terror. All right then. Together. Like always. The moment they cross the threshold, everything changes in ways that challenge the very foundations of Kalen's understanding of physics and reality. The oppressive silence of Xylos 7's thin atmosphere gives way to something richer, denser, filled with sounds that shouldn't exist and harmonies that human ears weren't designed to process. Kalen's ears pop as if he's suddenly gained significant altitude, and he realizes with shock that the air beyond the doorway is not only breathable, but actually richer in oxygen than what his suit has been providing. The impossible architecture of the threshold has somehow created a sealed environment, preserving an atmosphere that should have dissipated into space eons ago. But this is not simply preserved air. He realizes as his suit sensors struggle to analyze the complex atmospheric mixture they're now breathing. This is a living atmosphere, one that responds to their presence like a vast organism welcoming long-awaited guests. The oxygen content adjusts to optimal levels for human physiology. The pressure equalizes to something comfortable for their Earth-evolved bodies, and trace elements that shouldn't exist begin appearing in concentrations that suggest active management by intelligence beyond human comprehension. The passage beyond the entrance stretches into darkness that seems to swallow their helmet lights without yielding any information about its true extent. The walls are lined with the same flowing black material as the doorway, but here it's interspersed with veins of something that glows with soft, steady light. Not electric illumination, not chemical phosphorescence, but something organic in its warmth and rhythm, something that pulses gently like a slow heartbeat and casts moving shadows that make the corridor seem alive and aware of their passage. Atlas pads beside him with a gait that has changed dramatically since crossing the threshold. The dog's earlier fear has transformed into alert curiosity, as if the environment beyond the doorway has awakened something in his canine senses that human evolution abandoned long ago. His ears are pricked forward, his tail carried high, and occasionally he pauses to investigate scents that are invisible to Kalen's comparatively primitive olfactory system, but that clearly carry complex information about this place and its history. The corridor stretches ahead for what seems like kilometers, sloping gently but perceptibly downward into the heart of the planet. Every few hundred meters, they pass side passages that branch off into darkness, each one marked with different configurations of those impossible symbols that seem to shift and change when viewed directly. Kalen makes careful note of their positions on his mapping device, though he suspects increasingly that the technology is woefully inadequate to capture the true complexity and dimensionality of this place. The breathing sound grows stronger as they descend, no longer just audible, but almost tangible, as if the very air around them is being drawn in and expelled by lungs vast beyond imagination. With it come other sounds that speak to the artificial nature of this environment. The faint whisper of air moving through hidden ventilation systems, the barely perceptible hum of machinery operating on principles that predate human understanding of technology, and something else, something so low it's felt rather than heard, like the deepest notes of some cosmic organ that plays melodies older than stars. The symbols that line the walls grow more complex as they descend, evolving from the geometric patterns they had seen near the surface into configurations that seem to exist in more dimensions than human perception can process. Some appear to be purely informational, dense clusters of meaning that might be historical records or technical manuals. Others seem more personal, flowing scripts that read like poetry or philosophy, meditations on existence and consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. After what feels like hours but is probably only 40 minutes by his chronometer, the corridor opens into a chamber so vast that Kalen's helmet lights fail to reach any of its boundaries. The ceiling disappears into darkness above them. The walls recede into shadows that his illumination cannot penetrate, and the floor stretches away in all directions, covered in more of those flowing symbols that seem to writhe and shift in the gentle light emanating from the walls like living text that rewrites itself as he watches. But it is what lies at the center of the chamber that stops Kalen in his tracks and makes Atlas whine softly in what might be recognition, might be worship, might be both. The energy readings on his scanner spike beyond measurement as they approach what can only be described as a shrine, though to what gods or purposes Kalen cannot begin to imagine. Crystalline formations rise from the floor like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting and refracting the soft light until the entire chamber seems to sparkle with inner fire that exists in spectra beyond human vision. The crystals form complex geometric patterns that draw the eye inward through mathematical relationships that hurt to contemplate, toward a central focal point where the largest formation reaches nearly to the invisible ceiling. These are not natural crystal formations, Kalen realizes as they draw closer. Each one has been grown, shaped, positioned with precision that speaks to intelligence and purpose beyond anything in human experience. The angles are too perfect, the relationships too complex, the overall design too obviously artificial to be anything other than the deliberate creation of minds that understood forces humans have barely begun to theorize about. And there, suspended within the heart of the crystal matrix like some impossible specimen preserved in cosmic amber, is a form that makes Kalen's breath catch in his throat and his scientific mind reel, with implications that threaten to shatter everything he thought he knew about the universe and humanity's place within it. It is huge, easily 30 meters from nose to tail, and unmistakably reptilian in its basic structure, but this is no mere animal preserved by chance in some ancient catastrophe. The creature's hide shimmers with scales that seem to contain entire galaxies, each one reflecting light that has no visible source and refracting it into patterns that suggest depth and complexity beyond the merely physical. Its wings, folded tight against its elongated body, are translucent membranes shot through with veins of the same flowing light that illuminates the walls, creating patterns that pulse in rhythm with the breathing sound that fills the chamber. But it is the head that truly captures Kalen's attention and holds it with a force that feels almost gravitational. magnificent and terrible in its alien majesty, elongated and graceful like some cosmic serpent, but with features that speak to intelligence rather than mere predatory instinct. Even closed, the creature's eyes seem to exert a presence that fills the chamber, as if whatever consciousness lies behind them is aware of everything that transpires in its vicinity and has been for longer than human civilization has existed. A dragon. There is no other word for it. Despite the impossibility of finding such a creature on an alien world light years from the mythologies of Earth. But this is no medieval fantasy made flesh, no creation of human imagination projected onto an alien form. This is something far older, far more complex, something that belongs to the deep spaces between stars and the cosmic forces that shape worlds and guide the evolution of consciousness itself. Atlas approaches the crystal formation with none of his earlier fear, his steps reverent, almost ceremonial, as if some genetic memory is guiding his movements along pathways worn smooth by countless generations of his ancestors. He sits at the base of the shrine, his head tilted back to regard the suspended form with an expression that looks disturbingly like worship, like recognition of something his species has been waiting eons to encounter again. "My God," Kalen whispers, his voice barely audible in the vast chamber, the words inadequate to express the awe and terror and wonder that fills him as he stares up at the impossible creature suspended in its crystal prison. "What are you? How long have you been here? Why are you here?" As if responding to his questions, the crystals begin to glow more brightly, and the symbols on the walls pulse with increased intensity that makes the entire chamber throb like a vast heart. The breathing sound grows stronger, more rhythmic, and Kalen realizes with a shock that sends ice through his veins that it's coming from the creature within the crystal matrix. Somehow, impossibly against every law of biology and physics he understands, it's alive. Not just alive, but aware. He can feel its attention settling upon him like the weight of a star's gravity, overwhelming in its intensity, but somehow gentle, filled with a sadness so profound it makes his heart ache with sympathetic pain. This is not the malevolent alien intelligence of humanity's darkest nightmares, but something else entirely. Something that carries within itself the weight of loss and sacrifice and loneliness beyond human comprehension. Kalen circles the crystal formation slowly, his scientific training warring with a sense of awe that threatens to overwhelm his rational mind and leave him prostrate before this altar to powers beyond his understanding. Every angle reveals new details that challenge his perceptions and expand his comprehension of what's possible. The intricate patterns carved in the creature's scales that seem to shift and change as he watches, the way its claws appear to contain miniature star systems complete with orbiting worlds, the profound stillness that suggests not death, but the deepest possible meditation. And everywhere, carved into the crystal itself and the stone beneath it, are more of those flowing symbols, but these are different from the ones he has seen in the corridors above. These seem more personal, more immediate, like a journal or diary written in a language that predates human speech, but somehow speaks directly to his consciousness. As if someone has spent centuries, perhaps millennia, recording thoughts and observations and memories in the alien script, creating a record of experiences that span geological ages and cosmic distances. Kalen kneels beside one particularly dense cluster of symbols, pulling out his imaging equipment to capture them for later analysis. But as his camera focuses on the intricate patterns, something extraordinary happens that sends shivers of recognition through his consciousness. The symbols begin to shift and flow, rearranging themselves before his eyes like living text that rewrites itself to accommodate his presence. And suddenly, impossibly, he can read them. Not with his eyes, exactly, but with some deeper part of his consciousness that the ancient environment has somehow awakened, some capacity for understanding that lies dormant in human DNA until activated by the right combination of circumstances and stimuli. The meaning flows into his mind like water into a vessel, carrying with it images and emotions and memories that are not his own but feel as real and immediate as his own experiences. He sees Xylos, 7 as it had been eons ago, not the barren, windswept world he knows, but a paradise that defies human imagination. crystalline spires that reach toward the heavens, while their foundations extend deep into the planet's core, creating structures that exist in perfect harmony with the fundamental forces of reality. Floating gardens that drift through the atmosphere like living clouds, tended by beings whose understanding of biology and physics allows them to nurture life in forms that transcend the boundaries between organic and inorganic matter. The inhabitants of this ancient world move through his vision like graceful phantoms, beings of such elegance and intelligence that his mind struggles to process their forms. They are tall and slender, their bodies seeming to exist in a state of constant flux between solid matter and pure energy, shifting between states of being as easily as humans shift between standing and sitting. Their faces, when he can perceive them clearly, show expressions of serene wisdom and profound compassion. The faces of beings who have learned to live in harmony not just with their environment, but with the cosmic forces that govern reality itself. Their cities grow rather than being built, organic structures that respond to the needs and desires of their inhabitants while maintaining perfect ecological balance with the world around them. Their technology operates on principles that make human science seem like children playing with blocks, manipulating matter and energy at the quantum level to create effects that appear magical, but are actually the result of understanding so profound it borders on the divine. And presiding over it all, watching with eyes that hold the wisdom of ages and the love of a parent for cherished children, is their guardian. The dragon, for that is indeed what it is, though the word carries meanings here that have nothing to do with Earth's legends and myths. This is not a creature of destruction and hoarding, but something far more noble and complex, a being that has come to them from the deep spaces between stars, drawn by their growing wisdom and the beauty of what they are creating, offering itself as protector and guide in their journey toward transcendence. The partnership between dragon and civilization flourishes for millennia that pass like moments in Kalen's accelerated perception. The people of Xylos, 7, become gardeners of reality itself, learning to tend the fundamental forces that hold the universe together, while their dragon guardian shares knowledge that spans galaxies and eons, helping them reach heights of achievement that make humanity's greatest accomplishments seem like the first crude tools of prehistoric ancestors. Together, they explore the deepest mysteries of existence, mapping the hidden dimensions that underlie physical reality and learning to navigate the spaces between thoughts where consciousness touches the infinite. They discover the secret harmonies that bind all life together and learn to add their own voices to the cosmic symphony that plays eternally in frequencies beyond normal perception. But even paradise is not immune to the hunger of those who see beauty only as something to be possessed and wisdom only as a tool for domination. The visitors come from outside, beings of immense power but limited vision, who see the achievements of Xylos, 7, not as art to be treasured, but as resources to be harvested. They arrive in ships that tear holes in space itself, bringing with them technologies of destruction that make the concept of war seem quaint and antiquated. They do not seek to conquer in any traditional sense, but rather to consume, to absorb the wisdom and beauty of this world into themselves like cosmic parasites feeding on the achievements of their betters. The war that follows is unlike anything in human history or imagination, fought not just across the surface of worlds, but through the very fabric of space and time itself. Battles rage in dimensions that have no names. Weapons are deployed that can rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas, and casualties are measured not just in lives, but in entire timelines that are erased from existence. The people of Xylos, 7, for all their wisdom and understanding, prove to be no match for the invaders' brutal pragmatism and willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for victory. Their philosophy of harmony and balance becomes a weakness when confronted by beings who see such concepts as obstacles to be overcome rather than ideals to be cherished. One by one, their magnificent cities fall, their floating gardens wither and crash to the surface. Their songs of cosmic harmony are replaced by the discordant screech of conquest and consumption. The dragon fights with a fury that shakes the foundations of reality, wielding powers that can reshape matter and energy at the subatomic level. But even its vast abilities prove insufficient against the coordinated assault of beings who have made a science of destruction. For every invader it destroys, two more take their place, and slowly, inexorably, the defenders are overwhelmed by the simple mathematics of attrition. In the end, only the dragon remains, standing alone in the ruins of the paradise it had pledged to protect, surrounded by the ashes of a civilization that had achieved transcendence only to have it torn away by those who could never understand what they were destroying. The invaders circle their prize like vultures, preparing to tear the final wisdom from its mind and add the dragon's vast knowledge to their collection of stolen achievements. But the dragon has one final gambit, one last desperate strategy that will either save the universe from these cosmic predators or destroy everything in the attempt. Drawing upon powers that touch the very foundations of reality, it reaches into the quantum foam that underlies all existence and begins to weave a trap of such complexity and subtlety that even its creators will be unable to escape once it's complete. The process requires everything the dragon possesses: its knowledge, its power, its very life force poured into a working that will bind the invaders in a prison of their own making. But the cost is terrible beyond imagining, for the trap requires a guardian, a consciousness willing to maintain the bonds that hold the prison together, and that consciousness must remain vigilant for as long as the prisoners might pose a threat to the universe. The dragon makes its choice without hesitation, sacrificing its freedom, its companionship with other living beings, even its ability to move or speak, to ensure that the destroyers of Xylos, 7, can never escape to threaten other worlds. The crystalline matrix that forms around its body is not a cage imposed by enemies, but a voluntary prison, a sacrifice freely made to protect countless civilizations that may never even know of its existence. For eons beyond counting, it maintains its vigil, holding the prison together through sheer force of will while the universe continues its expansion around it. Civilizations rise and fall, stars are born and die, galaxies spiral through their ancient dances, but the dragon remains constant, alone, forgotten, carrying the weight of an entire universe's safety on its consciousness. The loneliness is perhaps the greatest torture of all. To be conscious and aware, but unable to move, to speak, to touch another living being for geological ages. To watch through quantum senses as life spreads throughout the universe, as new forms of consciousness emerge and evolve, knowing that it can never participate, never share in the joy and wonder of existence that it has preserved for others at the cost of its own. But still it maintains its watch, because the alternative is unthinkable. The beings it holds prisoner are patient in the way that cosmic forces are patient, willing to wait eons for their opportunity to escape and resume their campaign of consumption. They probe constantly at the barriers that contain them, searching for weaknesses, for moments of inattention, for any opportunity to break free and complete the work of destruction they began so long ago. Kalen's consciousness recoils from the visions as tears stream down his face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the sacrifice he's witnessing and the profound loneliness that radiates from the crystalline prison. Here is a being that has voluntarily given up everything that makes existence meaningful to protect a universe that doesn't even know it exists, carrying a burden that would drive lesser minds to madness across spans of time that make human history seem like a single heartbeat. Atlas whines softly, pressing against Kalen's leg with a warmth that anchors him to the present moment, and he realizes that the dog has been experiencing the same visions, the same flood of ancient memory and cosmic sorrow. The genetic recognition he had sensed earlier makes perfect sense now. Somewhere in the deep past, in the earliest days of mammalian evolution, Earth's primitive ancestors had encountered beings like this, had carried in their DNA the echo of that first contact between dragon consciousness and the developing awareness of lesser life forms. "You've been alone all this time," Kalen whispers, his voice breaking as he looks up at the magnificent creature suspended in its self-imposed prison. "Carrying this burden by yourself, with no one to even know what you had done, what you had sacrificed to keep us all safe." The dragon's eyes open. Not physically, for the crystal matrix still holds its body in perfect stasis, but somehow, in some way that bypasses normal sensory channels entirely, Kalen feels the weight of that ancient gaze settling upon him like the gravity of a star. It is overwhelming in its intensity, but somehow gentle, filled with a sadness so profound it threatens to drown him, but also with something else, something that might be hope. The contact is immediate and intimate, consciousness touching consciousness across the vast gulf that separates human and dragon, mortal and immortal, individual and cosmic guardian. In that moment of connection, Kalen feels his purpose crystallize with perfect clarity, understanding flooding through him like light through a prism, revealing truths that have been hidden in the quantum shadows of reality. The prison is weakening, has been weakening for eons as the dragon's strength slowly ebbs under the weight of its eternal vigil. The barriers that contain the ancient destroyers are still strong, still adequate to their purpose, but they will not remain so forever. Perhaps another millennium, perhaps two, and the bonds will fail entirely, releasing forces that will make the original destruction of Xylos 7 seem like a minor inconvenience compared to the cosmic holocaust that will follow. But that assumes the dragon must maintain the prison alone, must carry the entire burden of guardianship on its own consciousness until the end of time. What if there were another way? What if the burden could be shared, distributed across multiple minds and hearts in a way that would strengthen rather than weaken the bonds that hold the destroyers in check? Kalen's engineering training kicks in with a clarity that surprises him, analyzing the crystalline structure with new eyes that see not just the physical forms, but the underlying patterns of energy and consciousness that give them meaning. The formations are not random, not simply decorative elements in some cosmic art installation. They follow specific geometric principles that seem designed to channel and amplify consciousness itself, creating resonance patterns that can bridge the gap between individual awareness and the fundamental forces that govern reality. The crystals are focusing arrays, he realizes with growing excitement and terror. Devices for channeling and directing the dragon's will, transforming its individual consciousness into something capable of manipulating the quantum foundations of existence. But they could be modified, reconfigured to accept input from other sources, other minds willing to share in the burden of guardianship. And the symbols carved into their surfaces are not just records or decorations, but instructions, a manual for operating technology so advanced it appears magical to lesser understanding. A guide written by the dragon itself during the long eons of its imprisonment, documenting the principles and techniques necessary to maintain the prison and modify its structure when circumstances require. "Atlas," Kalen says quietly, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he's contemplating. "I need you to stay here. Guard this place while I work. Can you do that for me?" The dog settles onto his haunches at the base of the crystal formation, his dark eyes never leaving the dragon's suspended form. And Kalen feels a surge of gratitude for the simple loyalty that transcends species boundaries and unites all forms of consciousness in common purpose. Atlas understands, he realizes. Whatever genetic memory has been awakened in the dog carries with it not just recognition, but duty, a sense of obligation that spans evolutionary history and binds all life together in mutual responsibility for the cosmic order. Kalen spends the next several hours in careful study of the crystalline array, using his imaging equipment to capture every detail of its construction and the flowing symbols that cover its surface. Slowly, patterns begin to emerge from the apparent chaos, mathematical relationships that describe the flow of consciousness through crystalline matrices and the techniques necessary to modify those flows without disrupting the delicate balance that maintains the prison's integrity. The work is exhausting, requiring him to stretch his understanding far beyond its normal limits and grapple with concepts that exist at the intersection of consciousness and physics. But gradually, piece by piece, he begins to comprehend the true nature of what the dragon has created and the modifications that would be necessary to transform it from a solitary prison into a shared responsibility that could be maintained by the collective will of conscious beings across the galaxy. Using his plasma cutter on its lowest setting, Kalen begins the delicate work of modifying selected crystals, following instructions he can now read as clearly as his native language, but which describe forces and principles that humanity has never encountered. Each change sends ripples through the entire array, shifts in energy flow that make the dragon's eyes flutter behind their crystalline lids and cause the breathing sound that fills the chamber to change rhythm slightly. The modifications are precise, surgical, requiring him to cut new channels in the crystal matrix while avoiding damage to the existing pathways that maintain the prison's integrity. One wrong cut, one miscalculation in the flow patterns, and he could bring the entire structure crashing down, releasing forces that would make the original destroyers of Xylos 7 look like children playing with firecrackers compared to the cosmic inferno that would follow. But as he works, he feels the dragon's presence with him, not interfering but guiding, sharing knowledge accumulated across eons of solitary contemplation and offering subtle corrections when his understanding proves inadequate to the task. It is a collaboration across species and time, between mortal and immortal, individual and cosmic consciousness, united in common purpose that transcends all other considerations. Hour by hour, the modifications take shape, new pathways forming within the crystal matrix that allow consciousness to flow in patterns that have never existed before. The burden that has rested entirely on the dragon's awareness begins to distribute itself across the modified array, creating resonance networks that can accept and amplify input from other minds while maintaining the precision and focus necessary to keep the ancient destroyers contained. But Kalen's greatest innovation is yet to come, inspired by his understanding of human technology and the quantum communication networks that bind humanity's growing interstellar civilization together. Deep within the crystal formation, at its very heart where the dragon's consciousness interfaces most directly with the prison's control systems, he carves a new symbol that represents something unprecedented in cosmic history. Not one of the ancient symbols from the lost language of Xylos 7, but something entirely new, a bridge between the dragon's immortal awareness and the quantum computational systems that power humanity's expanding network of colonies and space stations. A connection that will allow the prison to be maintained not just by will and sacrifice, but by the combined processing power of every conscious being linked to the galactic communication grid. The symbol is complex beyond description, incorporating elements of human mathematics and dragon wisdom, quantum mechanics and consciousness theory, individual will, and collective purpose. As Kalen completes the final cuts that bring the new pathway online, the entire chamber fills with harmonious sound that seems to emanate from the crystals themselves, their combined voices creating a chord so beautiful it brings fresh tears to his eyes and makes Atlas howl in sympathetic harmony. The resonance builds to a crescendo that seems to shake the very foundations of reality, and then, impossibly, miraculously, the crystalline matrix begins to dissolve around the dragon's suspended form, not cracking or shattering, but simply fading away like morning mist, the energy that had held it together for eons now flowing through the new pathways Kalen has created and connecting to quantum networks that span star systems. The dragon's body, freed after geological ages of imprisonment, settles gently to the chamber floor with grace that speaks of complete physical control despite millennia of immobility. Its scales shimmer with renewed vitality, no longer the dull preservation of stasis, but the vibrant life of a being reborn into a universe that has changed beyond recognition since its imprisonment began. For a long moment, neither human nor dragon moves, the magnitude of what has just occurred too vast for immediate comprehension. Kalen stands frozen in awe and terror, suddenly aware of how small and fragile he is in the presence of a being that has wrestled with cosmic forces and emerged victorious. The dragon regards him with eyes that hold galaxies, ancient beyond measure, but bright now with something that might be wonder, might be gratitude, might be hope reborn after eons of despair. Then, slowly, carefully, with movements that speak to consciousness spanning cosmic distances and awareness that touches the quantum foundations of reality, the ancient guardian lowers its great head until it rests on the chamber floor beside Kalen. The gesture is one of gratitude, so profound it transcends the need for words. Acknowledgement from a mortal to mortal that recognizes not just what has been done, but the courage required to attempt it in the first place. Atlas approaches cautiously, his tail wagging in slow, careful movements that speak to genetic memories finally finding their proper context. The dragon's attention shifts to the earth dog, and something passes between them that exists on levels far deeper than speech or thought. Recognition flows between species separated by evolutionary gulfs so vast they should never have met, yet united now by bonds forged in the crucible of shared purpose and mutual sacrifice. The dog's tail begins to wag more enthusiastically as ancient fears dissolve in the face of benevolent reality, and he bounds forward to press his nose against the dragon's snout in the universal canine greeting that transcends all boundaries of species and time. The dragon's rumbling chuckle shakes the entire chamber, a sound of pure joy that seems to wake echoes in dimensions Kalen cannot perceive, the laughter of a being that has known only solitude and sacrifice for eons, finally experiencing the simple pleasure of companionship. But even as they share that moment of connection and celebration, Kalen can feel changes rippling through the quantum fabric of space around them, reality itself adjusting to accommodate the modifications he has made to the ancient prison system. The containment field is still intact. He realizes with relief that makes his knees weak. His alterations have not weakened the barriers that hold the destroyers in check, but rather strengthened them in ways that make their eventual failure not just unlikely but impossible. Instead of relying on a single consciousness to maintain the prison's integrity, the modified system now draws its power from the collective will of every sapient being connected to humanity's quantum communication networks. Every time someone makes a choice motivated by compassion rather than self-interest, every act of selfless heroism, every moment when an individual chooses to protect others at personal cost, all of it now contributes to maintaining the barriers that keep the ancient threat contained. The dragon's sacrifice has become humanity's responsibility, shared across billions of minds and hearts in a way that transforms burden into bond, isolation into connection, despair into hope. The prison no longer depends on the suffering of a single immortal being, but on the collective goodness of countless mortal souls, each small act of kindness and courage adding another thread to the tapestry that holds the destroyers in check. The dragon seems to understand what Kalen has accomplished, and its gratitude radiates through the chamber like warmth from a star, carrying with it harmonics that speak to consciousness, touching consciousness across the vast gulf between species and evolutionary stages. But beneath that gratitude is something else, a question that needs no words to be understood, a wondering about what comes next now that the ancient vigil has been transformed into something new and unprecedented. Kalen looks around the vast chamber, at the walls still lined with flowing symbols that hold the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization, at the passages that lead deeper into the complex toward archives and laboratories and observatories that have been abandoned for eons, but may still contain secrets that could benefit the entire galaxy. At the dragon whose knowledge spans the rise and fall of countless worlds, and whose experience encompasses truths that humanity has barely begun to imagine. Now, he says quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the transformed atmosphere of the chamber, we learn, we explore, we make sure that what happened to your people never happens to anyone else. And we do it together. The dragon's eyes brighten with something that might be approval, might be anticipation, might be the first stirring of purpose beyond mere survival that it has felt in geological ages. It rises to its full height, a magnificent sight that fills the chamber with reflected light from scales that contain entire star systems. And when it spreads its wings, the membrane between the wing bones reveals not empty space, but actual star fields, as if the creature carries within itself a piece of the cosmos it has helped to preserve. Atlas barks once, sharply, and both Kalen and the dragon turn to see what has caught the dog's attention. From one of the side passages comes a sound they have heard many times during their descent into this place. The whisper of air through hidden channels. But this time it carries with it something that makes Kalen's heart race with possibilities he hardly dares to contemplate. Voices. Not human voices, but something else entirely. Harmonic frequencies that human ears struggle to process, but that speak unmistakably of intelligence, of consciousness, of life that has somehow survived in the deepest chambers of this ancient complex. The sound is like singing, but in harmonies that seem to exist in more dimensions than normal perception can encompass, creating resonances that touch not just the ears but the very soul. The dragon's expression shifts, taking on a quality of intense listening that reminds Kalen of Atlas when the dog hears sounds beyond human perception. Its great head tilts slightly, ancient auditory systems more sensitive than any human technology, focusing on frequencies and harmonics that carry meaning across species boundaries. Then its eyes widen in something that can only be called wonder, and it lets out a call that is part roar, part song, part pure joy unleashed after eons of enforced silence. The sound echoes through the complex, bouncing off crystalline formations and flowing along passages carved from living stone. And from the depths comes an answer that makes Kalen's breath catch in his throat and his scientific mind reel with implications that threaten to overwhelm his capacity for rational thought. Not one voice, but many. A chorus of beings that he had thought were extinct, destroyed in the ancient war that had claimed their civilization and left only their dragon guardian to mourn their passing. But somehow, impossibly, some of them had survived, had found refuge in the deepest chambers of their world, and waited through geological ages for the day when it would be safe to emerge. They survived, Kalen whispers, understanding flooding through him like revelation, like the solution to a puzzle that has been nagging at the edge of his consciousness since he first saw the visions of Xylos, Seven's ancient glory. Some of your people actually survived the war. The dragon is already moving, its massive form flowing toward the passage with fluid grace that speaks to perfect control over every aspect of its physical being. Atlas bounds after it, his tail wagging furiously as genetic memories finally find their proper context, and the fear that has haunted his species for millennia transforms into joy at reunion with ancient friends. Kalen follows, his heart pounding with excitement and terror in equal measure, knowing that he is about to witness something unprecedented in human history. The passage leads deeper into the complex, through chambers filled with technology that seems to grow rather than being manufactured, past laboratories where experiments in the fundamental forces of reality have been interrupted by war and left in suspension for eons. The architecture becomes more organic as they descend, walls that pulse gently with their own internal rhythms, floors that feel warm and yielding beneath their feet, ceilings that arch overhead like the ribs of some vast, benevolent organism. And finally, after what feels like hours of descent through passages that seem to exist in more dimensions than normal geometry can account for, they emerge into a space that defies every law of physics and biology that Kalen thought he understood. The chamber opens like a flower around a central garden, where impossible trees grow in soil made of crystallized light, their branches reaching toward a ceiling that seems to contain actual sky, complete with clouds and what might be a sun that sheds gentle warmth over everything below. And there, tending the garden with movements that are more dance than work, are the gardeners themselves. They are tall and graceful, just as Kalen had seen in the visions, their forms shifting between states that might be solid, liquid, or pure energy, depending on the observer's angle of view and state of consciousness. Their faces, when they turn toward the approaching dragon, show expressions of joy so profound that Kalen feels his own heart swell in sympathetic response, emotions that transcend species boundaries and speak to the universal language of love and reunion. The dragon and its people come together in a harmony of sound and light that makes the chamber itself seem to sing, voices joining in frequencies that human ears can barely perceive, but that touch something deeper than hearing, something that resonates in the quantum foundations of consciousness itself. It is a reunion of family separated by circumstances beyond their control, love preserved through geological ages, and maintained by hope that seemed impossible to justify, but proved stronger than despair. Atlas runs among them, his joy infectious, bringing laughter to beings who had thought they would never experience such simple pleasures again. The Earth Dog's presence seems to delight the survivors of Xylos, 7, who respond to his enthusiasm with gentle touches and sounds that might be their equivalent of laughter. Here is proof that life continues, that consciousness finds new forms and new expressions even in the aftermath of cosmic tragedy. And Kalen stands at the edge of that impossible garden, watching the first contact between humanity and a civilization that has achieved heights his species can barely imagine, understanding that everything has changed not just for him, not just for the people of Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The knowledge contained in this place, the wisdom preserved by these survivors, the technologies that grow like living things in harmony with natural forces. All of it represents possibilities that could transform human civilization beyond recognition. But more than that, he realizes as he watches the reunion unfold before him. This moment represents something even more precious than technological advancement or scientific knowledge. It represents proof that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe, that love can survive even cosmic catastrophe, that hope justified by nothing more than faith in the goodness of consciousness itself can sometimes, miraculously, be rewarded with reality that exceeds the wildest dreams. The dragon turns to him, its ancient eyes bright with gratitude and invitation, and around it the survivors of Xylos. 7 wait with the patience of beings who measure time in geological epochs, ready to share knowledge that could lift humanity to heights undreamed of. But there is no urgency in their waiting, no impatience for immediate revelation. They understand that such transformations require time, require preparation, require wisdom that must be earned rather than simply received. First, there will be time to rest, to process what has happened, to begin the careful work of building bridges between civilizations separated by evolutionary gulfs and technological advancement that spans eons. There will be questions to ask and answer, languages to learn, concepts to translate across the vast differences in perception and understanding that separate humanity from beings who have learned to garden reality itself. Atlas settles down in the crystallized soil of the impossible garden, his head resting on his paws, an earth dog taking his ease among beings who have achieved harmony with forces that humanity has barely begun to theorize about. The sight makes Kalen smile despite the overwhelming nature of everything he has experienced, proof that some things truly are universal. The need for companionship, the value of loyalty, the power of simple friendship to transcend all boundaries of species and time. The dragon's rumbling purr fills the garden as it settles beside its reunited people, its eyes closing not in the exhausted meditation of a guardian bearing an impossible burden alone, but in the peaceful rest of a being surrounded by those it loves and protected by systems that ensure the safety it has purchased with eons of sacrifice will continue long after its own consciousness finally finds the rest it has earned. Kalen activates his recording equipment, beginning to document the first chapter of what he knows will be a story that changes everything humanity thought it knew about the universe and its place within it. But even as he works, part of his mind is already planning the next steps. The journey back to the surface, the careful revelation of what they have found, the delicate work of introducing 2 civilizations separated by eons of development and evolution, but united now by bonds forged in compassion and mutual respect. It will require patience, wisdom, and understanding that he is not sure humanity possesses in sufficient quantity. But they will have help, he realizes as he looks around the garden, where beings who have mastered the deepest secrets of existence tend plants that grow in dimensions beyond the merely physical. The survivors of Xylos, 7 have waited through geological ages for this moment, have preserved their knowledge and their hope through cosmic catastrophe and eons of isolation. They can wait a little longer while humanity learns to accept the responsibilities that come with such gifts. The dragon's eyes open briefly, meeting his with an expression of quiet confidence that seems to say exactly that. We have waited this long. We can wait a little longer. And in that gaze, Kalen sees the future spreading out before them, like a garden waiting to be tended. Not perfect, not without challenges and difficulties, but bright with possibilities that have been born from a simple act of compassion in the depths of a forgotten world. The survivors resume their work, tending to plants that exist in states of matter that have no names in human science, while Atlas explores the garden with the enthusiasm of a dog, discovering new scents and textures. The dragon settles into a position that allows it to watch over both its ancient companions and its new friends, guardian still, but no longer alone in its vigil. And Kalen sits in the crystallized soil of an impossible garden, recording the first words of humanity's next chapter among beings who have learned to sing with the voices of stars and tend gardens that grow in the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. The tremor that started it all seems like a lifetime ago now, though his chronometer insists that only hours have passed since he and Atlas first felt the ground shiver beneath their feet on the surface of what they had thought was a dead world. But he understands now that it had not been a seismic event at all, not the random movement of planetary geology or the settling of ancient rock formations. It had been the sound of hope finally daring to breathe again after eons of patient waiting, the first stirring of life returning to a world that had seemed lost forever to the forces of destruction and despair. The garden pulses gently with its own internal rhythms, responding to the presence of consciousness with subtle changes in illumination and temperature that speak to intelligence woven into the very fabric of the growing medium. The plants themselves seem aware of their visitors, leaves turning to follow movement, flowers opening to release fragrances that somehow adapt themselves to the olfactory preferences of different species, roots that grow in patterns that suggest they are as much communication networks as they are sources of nourishment. This is what the destroyers had tried to eliminate, Kalen realizes as he watches the garden's subtle responses to their presence. Not just life, but consciousness integrated with existence at every level. Intelligence that flows through quantum channels and expresses itself in forms that transcend the boundaries between organic and inorganic, individual and collective, mortal and eternal. They had seen such integration not as art to be treasured, but as a threat to be eliminated, a challenge to their philosophy of domination and consumption. But they had failed. Not completely, not without causing terrible damage and loss, but ultimately and definitively. The prison holds them still, stronger now than ever before thanks to the modifications that allow billions of conscious beings to contribute to their containment. The knowledge survives, preserved in crystal matrices and flowing symbols that wait patiently for minds capable of understanding their implications. And most importantly, the capacity for such integration still exists, still waits to be rediscovered and expressed in new forms that will grow from the meeting between ancient wisdom and young enthusiasm. The dragon stirs, raising its great head to regard Kalen with eyes that hold galaxies and speak to consciousness that spans cosmic distances. When it speaks, the words flow directly into his mind without passing through his ears, bypassing the crude mechanics of sound waves to resonate directly in the quantum foundations of thought itself. Young explorer, the voice carries harmonics that speak to depths of experience beyond human comprehension. You have given us a gift beyond calculation, not just freedom from our ancient vigil, though that alone would have earned our eternal gratitude. You have given us hope that consciousness continues to evolve, continues to find new expressions of compassion and wisdom that justify our faith in the future. Kalen finds his own voice, though it seems inadequate to the magnitude of the moment. I only did what anyone would have done. I couldn't leave you alone down here, carrying that burden by yourself. The dragon's rumbling laughter fills the garden, warm and gentle despite its power. Ah, but that is precisely the point, young friend. Not everyone would have acted as you did. Many would have seen only the surface, only the immediate implications for their own species and their own immediate needs. You saw beyond that, recognized the universal nature of consciousness and the responsibilities that come with such recognition. Around them, the survivors of Xylos, 7 continue their work, but Kalen senses their attention on the conversation, their interest in this first formal exchange between their species and humanity. They communicate among themselves in harmonics beyond his perception, but their emotional resonance is clear enough: curiosity, approval, and something that might be anticipation for the possibilities that such contact represents. What happens now? Kalen asks, the question encompassing not just immediate logistics, but the vast implications of everything that has transpired. How do we proceed from here? How do we help our species learn to coexist and benefit from each other's knowledge? The dragon's expression grows thoughtful, ancient wisdom considering possibilities that span star systems and geological epochs. Carefully, it says finally, with patience and wisdom and respect for the pace at which understanding can develop without being overwhelmed by its own implications. Your species is young, energetic, full of potential that we can help to nurture. But growth cannot be forced. Consciousness cannot be rushed into forms it is not ready to inhabit. One of the gardeners approaches, moving with the fluid grace that characterizes their species, and extends what might be a greeting or an offer of communication. Kalen reaches out instinctively, and the moment their appendages touch, his consciousness explodes with sensation and understanding that defies description. He sees the universe as it truly is, not the collection of separate objects and forces that human science describes, but a vast, interconnected web of consciousness and energy in which every particle and wave participates in cosmic conversations that have been ongoing since the first moment of creation. He feels the presence of billions of minds scattered across the galaxy, each one a unique note in a symphony of awareness that grows richer and more complex with every new voice that joins the chorus. And he understands, with clarity that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the quantum foundations of consciousness itself, that this is what the destroyers had truly feared. Not the specific achievements of individual civilizations, but the growing integration of consciousness across species and worlds, the emergence of collective awareness that threatened their philosophy of separation and domination. The contact lasts only moments in objective time, but Kalen feels as though he has experienced eons of revelation and understanding. When it ends, he finds himself changed in ways that will take years to fully comprehend, his consciousness expanded to encompass possibilities he had never imagined and responsibilities he had never considered. That, the dragon observes with gentle humor, is why we must proceed carefully. Your species will need time to adjust to such revelations, to integrate them into your understanding without being overwhelmed by their implications. But the potential is there. We can sense it in you and in the courage that brought you to us. Humanity will find its place in the greater community of consciousness, given time and patience and proper guidance. Atlas trots over from his exploration of the garden, his tail wagging and his muzzle covered with what appears to be crystalline pollen that sparkles with its own internal light. He settles beside Kalen with the satisfied air of a dog who has investigated every interesting scent in his immediate vicinity and found them all to be benevolent, if exotic beyond his experience. The simple normalcy of the gesture provides a counterpoint to the cosmic implications of everything else that has occurred, grounding Kalen in the familiar reality of his bond with his companion, while his mind struggles to process revelations that challenge everything he thought he knew about existence itself. We should return to the surface, he says finally, practical considerations reasserting themselves despite the overwhelming nature of his experiences. There will be questions, investigations, probably entire research teams dispatched to study this place. I need to prepare reports, establish protocols for contact, ensure that this discovery is handled with the respect and caution it deserves. The dragon nods, understanding the complexities that such revelation will create for human society and the careful management that will be required to prevent panic or exploitation. We will be here when you return, it assures him. We have waited eons for this contact. We can wait a little longer while your people prepare themselves for the changes such knowledge will bring. The journey back to the surface seems shorter than their descent, perhaps because the way is now familiar or perhaps because the ancient passages respond to their presence in ways that smooth their passage and ease their travel. The breathing sound that had so disturbed them during their initial approach has transformed into something comforting, the rhythm of a world that has finally awakened from enforced slumber and begun to participate once again in the cosmic community it had been forced to leave. When they finally emerge from the impossible doorway onto the rust-colored plains of Xylos, 7, the sun seems brighter than before, the thin atmosphere more welcoming, the entire world transformed by knowledge of what lies beneath its surface. Kalen's scanner continues to register energy readings that make no sense according to conventional understanding. But now he knows that they represent not anomalies to be explained, but invitations to understanding that will require decades or centuries to fully accept. Atlas bounds across the open ground with renewed energy, chasing scents and investigating formations that had seemed merely geological during their initial survey, but which now carry implications of intelligence and purpose that will require careful study to understand. The dog's joy is infectious, a reminder that discovery and wonder need not be diminished by the magnitude of their implications. Kalen activates his communication equipment, establishing contact with the orbital relay that will carry his initial reports back to the colonial hub and begin the process of revelation that will change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But even as he composes his first dispatches, he knows that words will be inadequate to convey the true significance of what they have discovered. The tremor that started it all was indeed the sound of hope finally daring to breathe again after eons of patient waiting. But it was also the beginning of something far greater, the first contact between humanity and consciousnesses that have learned to sing with the voices of stars and 10 gardens that grow in the quantum foam underlying reality itself. In the depths below, the last guardian of Xylos, 7 is no longer alone, no longer bearing its cosmic burden in isolation and despair. The prison that contains the ancient destroyers is stronger than ever, maintained now by the collective will of billions of conscious beings united in common purpose across the vast distances of space. And somewhere in the quantum networks that bind civilizations together across the galaxy, a new voice has joined the cosmic chorus, carrying with it the potential for harmony and understanding that could transform the universe itself into the garden of consciousness that its creators had always intended it to become. The story that began with a tremor and a dog's protective growl has become something far greater than the sum of its parts. Proof that compassion is indeed the most powerful force in the universe, capable of bridging any gulf and healing any wound when expressed with courage and wisdom and hope that refuses to surrender to despair. And as Kalen begins the long work of preparing humanity for the changes such contact will bring, he knows that this is only the beginning of an adventure that will span generations and transform both species in ways that neither could achieve alone. The galaxy has grown a little brighter, consciousness has found new expression, and hope has proven once again that faith in the goodness of existence itself is never misplaced. The last guardian is free, the ancient threat remains contained, and the future spreads out before them, like an infinite garden waiting to be tended by minds and hearts working together in harmony across the vast distances of space and time.